People always assume that power wears a suit and speaks from behind a sleek mahogany desk. But in truth, power often walks past unnoticed, mopping the floors or emptying bins when no one's looking. Helena Ward, CEO of one of the most prestigious tech firms in the city, had everything she thought mattered: a corner office, a skyline view, and a legacy in the making. Yet despite her achievements, a strange restlessness had taken hold of her in recent weeks, one that seemed to surface around 7 p.m. every evening, just as the building emptied and silence swallowed the halls. It was always then that she'd spot him, Miguel, the janitor, quiet, lean, efficient. He never lingered, never spoke more than a polite "evening, ma'am," and disappeared through service doors like smoke in the wind. But Helena noticed something different. It was in the way he moved, not sluggishly like a man going through the motions, but with rhythm, like his body was obeying a hidden metronome. It wasn't just work, it was art, and on that chilly Thursday evening, her curiosity finally overtook her discipline. She stayed behind. She waited in her office with the lights off, watching as Miguel finished his duties on the top floor. Then, when he slipped into the stairwell, Helena followed quietly behind, heels in hand, heart pounding, not knowing that what she was about to discover would change her entire view of humanity. The stairwell echoed with every cautious step she took, the sound of her breath bouncing off the concrete walls. Miguel descended with a quiet grace, completely unaware of the woman trailing several steps behind. The service stairs were rarely used by executives, narrow, dimly lit, and winding downward in a dizzying spiral. Helena had never realized how deep they went. It felt like she was being pulled into another world, far removed from glass boardrooms and financial forecasts. At the bottom, Miguel paused and glanced over his shoulder, but saw nothing. He pushed open a heavy door marked "Maintenance, Authorized Personnel Only," and stepped inside. Helena slipped through just as it began to close. What she saw beyond made her freeze. It wasn't a storage room filled with tools and wires. It was something else entirely. The space was wider than she expected, walls padded with dark foam, and thick carpets muffling every sound. Old speakers stood in corners beside dusty amplifiers. There was a drum set, 3 guitars, and a vintage upright piano glowing beneath a warm yellow lamp. Miguel set down his janitor's bag and walked straight to the piano, sitting like it was his natural throne. Then he played. Not idly, not experimenting. He played as if his soul had been locked in silence all day, and now finally, he could breathe. The music was mournful and sweet, full of longing and fire. Helena couldn't move. Her throat tightened. This wasn't just a janitor. This was someone who had lived, lost, and loved through melody. And she, CEO, queen of the 42nd floor, had no idea he existed until now. Helena leaned against the doorframe, hidden in the soft darkness, afraid to even breathe too loudly. Every note that Miguel played pulled at something inside her. Memory, a regret, a truth she'd buried beneath 1,000 board meetings and investor calls. She wasn't just witnessing music. She was witnessing confession. The piano sang of storms and silence, of someone who had lost everything but still held onto a piece of themselves, safe and hidden like this room. Her chest ached, not because the song was sad, but because it was real, raw, honest in a way most things in her world weren't anymore. She stayed until the final note faded into stillness, and only then did Miguel look up and freeze. He spotted her silhouette and stood quickly, startled. "I'm sorry," Helena said softly, stepping into the light. "I didn't mean to intrude." Miguel said nothing at first. He looked at her not with fear or anger, but with quiet acceptance, like he'd been waiting for this moment to come. "You followed me," he said finally. His voice was calm but low, like his music layered with history. "Yes," Helena admitted, not ashamed. "I needed to know." A silence passed between them. heavy with unsaid things. Then Miguel gestured toward a battered old stool near the wall. "Then sit," he said. "If you're going to listen, really listen." And so she did. Helena sat on the stool, her back straight, but her mind spinning. Miguel didn't ask questions. He simply returned to the piano, laid his hands gently on the keys, and began to play again. This time, the melody was softer, more deliberate. It wasn't for the room, it was for her. And Helena listened, truly listened, not as a CEO, but as a woman who'd forgotten what it felt like to be moved. The music wasn't rehearsed. It flowed from him like breath, like memory. Every chord felt like a thread pulling open a curtain she hadn't realized was there. She saw flashes in her mind, her father's old record player, the first concert she attended as a teenager, the way her mother used to hum in the kitchen on Sunday mornings. The music unlocked pieces of her she'd packed away to make room for deadlines and power suits. When the song ended, Miguel didn't look at her. He stared at the floor, fingers resting on the keys like he was waiting to be judged. But Helena said nothing. She couldn't. Her throat was thick, her eyes glassy. "How long have you been doing this?" she asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Since before this building was built," he replied, a faint smile on his lips. "Music was my first home. I've just been visiting it in secret." Helena stared at him, at the instruments, at the studio hidden beneath her empire, and wondered how something so profound could exist in silence for so long. The room seemed to hum with invisible echoes, even after the last note had vanished. Helena let the silence stretch, not wanting to break whatever sacred atmosphere had settled around them. She looked around again at the faded posters of Argentine jazz legends taped to the walls, the worn frets on the guitars, the sheet music scattered like leaves across a wooden bench. "You built all this?" she asked, almost in disbelief. Miguel nodded slowly. "Bit by bit, over the years. Found most of the instruments at thrift stores, pawn shops, abandoned schools." He glanced around, as if seeing it all anew through her eyes. "I never expected anyone else to see it." Helena felt something stir inside her, guilt maybe, or awe. She had walked these halls for years, believing she knew every inch of the building, every name on payroll, every secret worth knowing. But beneath all that, this man had been creating a hidden cathedral of sound right under her feet. "Why here?" she asked. "Why not play in public, record something, share it?" Miguel gave a soft, sad chuckle. "I used to," he said. "In Buenos Aires, I was someone once, but when I left, the music stayed behind. I thought maybe if I kept playing, it would find me again." His words sank deep into Helena's heart. For the first time in a long while, she had no business advice, no productivity metric, no solution. Just silence and respect. Helena shifted on the stool, her thoughts tangled. The woman who commanded boardrooms with sharp precision now sat in a forgotten basement studio, humbled by a man whose name she barely remembered seeing on a payroll sheet. "You were someone once," she repeated softly. "And you still are." Miguel smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Maybe. But in the world out there," he gestured upward, toward the steel and glass monolith above them, "titles matter more than talent. Papers more than passion." Helena looked down at her hands that had signed million-dollar deals and held awards but hadn't touched a piano key in decades. She'd played once, as a child. Her parents said it was a waste of time. "I forgot," she whispered. Miguel looked at her. "Forgot what?" "What it feels like to feel something and not quantify it. Not sell it or measure it or package it into a goal." Miguel didn't respond. He didn't need to. The stillness between them was its own kind of music. She stood slowly, brushing dust from her skirt. "Would you mind if I came back sometime?" she asked, unsure if she was overstepping. Miguel's face softened. This room was never locked. Most people just never noticed the door. And in that moment, Helena realized something else. The company she built wasn't just made of servers and salaries. It was made of people like Miguel, unseen, unheard, but essential. And she had been blind. That night, Helena didn't go straight home. Instead, she sat in her car long after the engine started, watching the city lights blur through her windshield. Something had shifted. She felt it in her chest, like a weight being slowly lifted, not because she had found a secret, but because she had remembered something about herself. The following day at work, everything looked the same: polished marble floors, sleek glass partitions, buzzing phones, but Helena saw it differently. She watched people more closely. The receptionist who always arrived 15 minutes early and never spoke much. The security guard who wrote poetry on the back of visitor logs. The accountant who hummed when she thought no one was listening. And of course, Miguel, who returned to his quiet routines as if nothing had changed. But Helena had changed. That evening, she returned to the studio with 2 cups of coffee and a question in her heart. What if others could hear this too? She didn't want to expose Miguel. She didn't want to commercialize what was sacred. But she felt the urge to share, not to profit, but to honor. Would you ever consider recording? She asked gently, offering him a cup. Miguel took it, silent for a moment. Only if I keep control, he said. And if it's never about fame, Helena nodded. Only about the music. A small smile tugged at his lips. And for the first time since she met him, Miguel looked her in the eye and nodded back. Asterisk, asterisk. The next few weeks unfolded like a secret collaboration. Helena arranged for a discreet audio technician, someone she trusted deeply, to bring in portable recording equipment after hours. Miguel, initially hesitant, warmed to the idea once he realized there would be no audience, no lights, no pressure, just him and the piano. As always, the sessions were long, intimate, and raw. Helena sat in the corner each night, headphones on, eyes closed, letting the music wash over her. Miguel's compositions weren't flashy or commercial. They were emotional landscapes, filled with quiet storms and distant warmth. Each piece told a story, and Helena made sure each one was labeled by feeling, not title. The Year I Left, Rain Before Sleep, Letter to No One. She funded the project quietly, personally, never mentioning it to the board. It wasn't company business, it was something greater. Something human. One night, as Miguel finished a particularly haunting piece, Helena asked, "Do you ever want them to know, the others?" Miguel leaned back, his fingers still on the keys. "I think I just want to be heard, even if they never know my name." That stayed with her. In a world where everything had a price tag, here was a man content with invisibility as long as his truth lived in sound. Helena knew, at that moment, that she wasn't just documenting music, she was preserving a soul. And maybe, if she did it right, the world would finally learn how to listen again. Asterisk, asterisk. By the end of the 3rd week, they had recorded enough material for a full-length album. The music was raw and unpolished in the most beautiful way. It didn't sound like it came from a studio. It sounded like it came from a place deep within someone who had survived heartbreak and exile, yet still found beauty in quiet corners. Helena named the project After Hours, not just because of the time it was recorded, but because of what it represented, everything that lived in the shadows, unseen but essential. She reached out to a small independent label known for promoting forgotten voices and unsigned talent, sending them the recordings anonymously. The response came swiftly. The label was stunned. "Who is this?" they asked, amazed. Helena smiled and replied simply, "A man who plays for no one but means it for everyone." Miguel hesitated when she told him about the offer. He didn't want stages or interviews. But when Helena explained the label's vision to preserve the music, without altering its soul, he finally agreed, quietly, reluctantly. As the tracks were prepared for digital release, something else began to shift in Helena's world. She started noticing things in the office she'd never looked at before. A janitor quietly sketching on his break, a cafeteria worker singing softly to herself, a junior developer writing poetry in the margins of his notes. It was like Miguel had opened her eyes not just to art, but to the lives people lived when they weren't performing for their jobs. ***, when the album was released under the simple name M. Alvarez, no one in the company connected it to the quiet janitor who emptied their trash bins. But the music found its way into the world like a ripple in still water, slow at first, then suddenly everywhere. A few prominent music bloggers picked it up, praising its raw emotional depth, calling it an unfiltered portrait of longing. One described it as music made by someone who remembers silence too well. Streams poured in. People connected not to the polish, but to the pain, the honesty, the truth behind every note. And Miguel, he didn't change. He still showed up every evening with his uniform on, mop in hand, keys jangling quietly at his belt. But something in his posture had shifted, lighter, freer. Helena watched it all unfold quietly, saying nothing to the public, refusing interviews. This wasn't her story to tell. But what she could do was amplify the lesson she had learned. In a board meeting that month, she proposed a new initiative, one that baffled some of her colleagues. It was called Hidden Depths, a quarterly internal showcase where employees could share their creative side, music, art, stories, dance, whatever lived outside their job titles. Not everything valuable is listed on a resume, Helena told them. Sometimes the most powerful parts of a person live where no one is looking. And just like that, the company began to change, not just in culture, but in heart. Because when one person is truly seen, others begin to look around. The first Hidden Depths event was modest. Just a few folding chairs in the break room and a makeshift stage fashioned from pallets and tablecloths. Helena didn't expect a crowd, but when she walked in that Friday evening, the room was full. Employees who had worked side by side for years were seeing each other for the first time. A marketing analyst read a spoken word poem about surviving her father's illness. A receptionist played the violin so beautifully that it brought one of the interns to tears. There was laughter, applause, and long moments of reverent silence. And in the middle of it all, quietly seated near the back, was Miguel. He didn't perform. He didn't need to. His presence was enough, a living reminder of how deep a person's life could go beyond what their job described. After the event, a young programmer approached Helena, eyes wide with emotion. "I never thought I was allowed to bring this part of me to work," he said. "Thank you." Helena smiled, humbled. She realized something profound. When she followed Miguel that night, she hadn't just discovered music. She had discovered a forgotten truth, that people are whole beings, carrying unseen stories, skills, and scars. And sometimes, the smallest act of curiosity, of daring to look beneath the surface, can ripple outward and change the spirit of an entire organization. And so, without press releases or headlines, a quiet revolution began, not driven by profits, but by presence. Weeks passed, then months, and the ripple Miguel had started never stopped. Helena began receiving messages not just from employees, but from strangers across the world who had discovered the album. One came from a retired music teacher in Italy who said she cried when she heard Rain Before Sleep because it reminded her of a student she had lost. Another came from a father in Tokyo who wrote that letter to no one was the only thing that calmed his son with autism. At night, Miguel read every message Helena printed and gave him. He never replied, but she could tell they meant everything to him. Fame didn't change him. It didn't need to. He remained the man who moved through the building with quiet precision. The man who played not for applause, but to remember who he was. For Helena, everything was different now. She no longer saw her company as just an empire of innovation and systems. It was a community, one she had unknowingly kept trapped in roles and expectations until Miguel reminded her that brilliance doesn't always sit at the boardroom table. Sometimes it sweeps the floor at night and plays its heart into dusty keys. And as she stood one evening in that basement studio, watching Miguel play under the warm light of a single lamp, Helena finally understood the real meaning of leadership, not to be the loudest in the room, but to listen deeply to the quietest voice. 1 year after Helena first followed Miguel down that dim service stairwell, the building felt different. Not in its structure, but in its soul. There was laughter in the elevators now. Paintings from employees hung in the hallways. The monthly Hidden Depths showcase had become a cherished tradition, something that people looked forward to more than bonuses or free lunches. And tucked beneath it all, the studio remained untouched, preserved exactly as it had always been. Miguel still cleaned the floors each evening, still walked with the same quiet rhythm. But now, people nodded at him with respect. Some even paused to chat. No one asked about the album, not because they didn't care, but because they understood. His music was a gift, not a product. Helena often visited him after hours, not as a CEO, but as a friend. Sometimes they spoke. Sometimes they simply sat in silence as he played. She had everything she once thought success required, but now, she also had something she never knew she needed, a reminder that greatness often comes not from commanding the room, but from noticing the unnoticed dot. And so, the woman who once ruled from the 42nd floor with spreadsheets and silence became the leader who listened. And the janitor, who once disappeared into the night without a name, left a legacy etched in sound, not stone. Together, without ever intending to, they built something rare in the corporate world, a culture where humanity mattered, where art had a place, and where, just maybe, the quietest people could finally be heard.